the wealth of particularly North Sea oil was completely squandered really on pushing through an ideology, and Britain has been left now as I think, as many people have said, deindustrialised, and that's a problem, I think.
Do you think, come back to your point about Kant, in the end, politicians of whatever stripe, whoever they are, there's an element of themselves as the ego in there, isn't there? No politician is purely driven by, I just simply want to make the world a better place.
Exactly, but the myth that they spread about themselves necessarily is that they do tend to cast themselves in a heroic mould, and whereas in and the other thing is that that I think the business of being a politician is about conspiring against people. People in your own party and people in the other party. And I think that sets up a problematic kind of environment, I think.
Although it makes it a great show. Doesn't it? It makes it a great soap opera. As a writer, the people whose lives I mess with are fictional. The problem with politicians is that the people whose lives they mess with, driven by exactly the same ego as me, are real. And that's a kind of a problem, I like the idea that you have the same ego.
Yeah, well, it is. It's all just egotists. It's all just personality disorders. It's just some of us are just doing little shows in Soho, and others of us are
starting wars.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about. So you going back to stand-up. First time since 1995. I know you call it more MCing.
Yes, I'm trying to lower. I think what the politicians call lower expectations.
Yeah. But your wife didn't want you to return to stand-up, Alexei.
No,
is that right?
That's right. Well, she, in 2007, Channel 4 had a poll of the top 100 comedians in the world, and I came, I think it was 18th. And Linda's theory is that I was then 73rd when they have it again in 2010. But I don't know how valid the poll was. Probably about as good as the Syrian elections. But my wife's theory is that that people only kind of revere me because they've never seen me like you. That it is this myth, because I came right at the start of a kind of era, that I have this kind of mythic Elvis-like status, which will be completely destroyed when people see.
And are you worried about that?
Yeah, I am actually. Yeah, I am. I'm very worried. I think. I'm kind of concerned. Yeah.
I think you'll be. I'm sure you do a very good show, Alexei, but it doesn't undermine what you've done in the past anyway, does it? If Paul McCartney brings out a bad album, people don't suddenly decide what he did before was a load of rubbish. But I suppose Linda's point is, a lot of people have never seen anything you've done. Is that what she's saying?
Well, I'm sort of making a comedic point. I mean, I don't know. I mean, she thinks there is a legacy there, and I think you risk undermining it by being rubbish now, really.
But your legacy is both the work that you did in the past, and I think that the part that you played in that movement, as you were the first person to do stand-up at Edinburgh, you were the first person to MC the Comedy Store, and of course the comic strip as well. For those which I've seen and loved, just for those that don't know the comic strip, although there was one on telly recently, wasn't there? But just remind people what that was exactly.
I mean, I wasn't in the first ones. I only joined slightly later. I mean, but there was, I think it was like the comic strip was a kind of loose collective of people who'd been at the comic strip club. I mean, you mean the telly work rather than the. I mean, amazing coming together of talent, really, at the Comic Strip Club. It was Rick Mail, Adrian Edmondson, Peter Richardson, Nigel Planer, Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders and me. And, then we went on to, do both the young ones and the Comic Strip TV series. And the Comic Strip TV series was... a sort of all one-off films. I mean, beautiful production values and stuff. Started with Five Go Mad in Devon, I think.
Which is great.
And then we made this. I think one of the first ones I was in was The Strike, which won Golden Rose of
Montreux,
yes. I was trying to think of a funny town. So probably just better tell it. And film Supergrass, which also was a really good film. And
do you all still meet up?
Yeah, we do from time to time. Yeah, there's like little parties and stuff like
that. Has the pecking
order
changed?
Yes, very much. That Dawn and Jennifer, who we used to pay half of what the rest of us got, and we were, I was like on the front cover of Time Out. Now Dawn and Jennifer are, we can't, they're like Chinese emperors now. We have to get down on our knees and can't look at them. They're so famous. So no, there isn't really. But I mean, it's just, it changes around that. I think that French and Saunders are, in many ways, and still consistently the most successful out of all of us, really.
Alexei, Soho Theatre, Tuesday, back on stage, first time since 1995. Why did you give up stand-up in 95?
Well, in fact, I gave it up in 96, but I was in Australia. But, well, I think I was just tired, really. I mean, the thing about it is, though, I think when you're starting something that, again, like I said before, you're doing everything for the first time, and some of that's good, but some of that, in terms of like venues and people to work with and stuff, it's you have to figure it out, and I can remember, kind of appearing at discos in which they'd stop the music and I'd come on and do 20 minutes of Marxist material, to a great lack of appreciation. So, you find yourself, and I think it just kind of grinds you down after a while, really. Yeah. I mean, I think that was my feeling, that I'd reached the end. And also, I think I do have, despite all the kind of post-punk kind of trappings, I had a very conventional kind of show business thing that I always wanted the audience to have a good time. And I think that meant that in a way I felt compelled to stick with the tight suits and to do a lot of new material, but also to do the hits as well, and I felt I was trapped in that persona of the kind of the ranting kind of mod kind of persona, and I couldn't, in a live sense, I couldn't break out of it, and that's why I stopped and then became an author, a much more kind of intellectual pursuit.
Which is a big turning point for you, wasn't it, when you became an author? And your book of short stories met with huge critical acclaim. Douglas Adams was a big fan of it,
he was. Sadly died. It was amazing. Particularly, the first two collections of short stories got, and still in print and still selling very well. A wonderful critical response, and that was very thrilling to me because the short stories were a much more complex kind of nuanced proposition than my stand-up had been. I think
we talked about when you started out in the 1980s. You were the first stand-up to MC the Comedy Store, first stand-up at Edinburgh. When you think back to the early 80s comedy scene, obviously compare it with today, it's a big, slick operation these days, isn't it? A world away, I would imagine, from the stand-up scene of the early 80s.
I think so. I always say, when when my generation was good, we were amazing, but when we were bad, we were catastrophic. And it's a much more reliable product that that you kind of know what you're going to get going in, I think. Although there are people, I suppose, like Frankie Boyle and stuff, and then there are other people on the sort of fringe, like people like Daniel Kitson, who do a more modulated sort of thing. But with the huge industry, is I think to play to 10,000 people in some arena, your material is inevitably going to be
quite mainstream.
But
those comics were more mainstream, like Peter Kay or Michael McIntyre. Do you admire them as performers?
Well, yeah, I think it's amazing to be able to do that, and it's certainly not something I could ever manage, I think. And there is also the thing that I did say, those sort of mainstream comics that came before the Comedy Store comic strip generation were very malevolent in many ways. A lot of them, their material was racist and certainly was very misogynistic. And whereas with somebody like all those people like Peter Kay or John Bishop or Michael McIntyre, there's no hint of that. It is all very it's lacking in kind of nastiness, and that's a big thing, really, I think, and that so that means that it's always, it's always a decent experience to see them, there isn't that kind of vile thing that a lot of them old timers had,
I also wanted to ask you about, just jumping around topics here, just because it interests me, because you grew up, your parents, switching back to politics a little bit, but your parents are both communists, so you grew up in a communist household. I just wanted to ask you about, what, as a sort of a day-to-day experience, what that was like. Did that impact what you could watch on telly, listen to on the radio, what you bought? How did that manifest itself?
Well, we were it wasn't a problem for us. In Liverpool in the 50s, it was, to be a communist was not particularly unique in some ways. But in some ways it was just like being a member of a cult, and so I think now politics is, the same as being in the Hare Krishna or Scientologist. It's a cult, and so you think that you have you have the solutions to all the world's problems. And I always remember the first day of school, the teacher, primary school, the teacher, Miss Wilson, said, class, let's put our hands together and thank God for the milk. And I put my hand up and I said, no, Miss Wilson, I think you'll find that the milk is provided by the Milk Marketing Board, which is a semi-autonomous NGO used by the bosses to force up the price of milk. So, I was given to those little kind of Marxist pronouncements from day one.
Politically engaged. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
But I think she must have had a word with the other kids and told them I was special because they never picked on me.
No. Did you, and in terms of, I don't know, being at home, and did it impact what you were allowed to watch and what the stuff you bought at home?
I mean, my parents had a kind of a threat. They weren't dull people, and so they had a kind of thread of rebellion in them that didn't, they were pretty open. I mean, they used to try and stop you by, watching American stuff or buying American comics and stuff, but they really didn't. They weren't that bad about it. I mean, I always say Christmas, in our house would start with us shouting at the Queen's speech on the television,
right,
and go on from there. But, I mean, they were sort of, they weren't grey party apparatchiks, my parents, and so they made communism into fun. They made the oppression of half the world into fun.
But if you were trying to put on a sort of great American movie, they wouldn't say, there's a much better Eastern European film we've got for you here.
Yeah, there's a Polish animation on the other side about a mouse being chased by a tower block. My mother would say, what's this? My mother's never been a fan of Hollywood, but I mean that just made it all the more attractive to me, really. And in the end, they didn't prescribe it,
There's a text about your mum here for a guy called Otis who says, please ask Alexei Sayle how his mum's 96th birthday party went. Mr. Sayle wrote wonderfully about his mum Molly in Stalin Ate My Homework, a joy to read.
Yes, Molly's, it was quite a quiet party, her 96th, but I told this story... I told this story, I think, on the radio the other day, but I got a phone call. She's got one of those pendants that goes around your neck, and I got this phone line. I said, it's Caroline Merseyside here. Your mother's brolly's blown onto the shed roof, and she's pressed her pendant. She wants us to come round and get it down from the shed roof. But no, Molly's doing very well. In fact, she's sort of...
Is that the first time she'd used the pendant?
I think it might be, yeah. Yeah. Right. She had a stroke or something. She probably wouldn't use it, but to get her parasol off the shed roof.
That's great.
But yeah, no, she. It was a quieter affair than her 95th. But she's doing great. She's still. I mean, her mind is as sharp as ever.
Is it really?
Yeah. I mean,
still political?
She's still very, very political. Although she does have that a Stalinist thing of actually having anything inconvenient she's edited out. So I say, what about your support for the, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge? And she said, are you lying? It never happened. So she's managed to, she's a difficult person to argue with because she's she's deleted any wrong moves that she ever made.
Oh, Alexei, it's great to talk to you. I could just go on for hours. Thank you for coming on today. We've got Kelvin MacKenzie on later. He was a dominant figure of the 1980s.
He certainly was. Yes.
Do you remember his influence?
I do. Yeah, and in fact, I did. Have I Got News for you once with him in the early 90s, and we got on surprisingly well. I think both chippy working class kids, but mine kind of my chippiness went towards radicalism, and his I think went towards bitterness and whatever you think the Sun was like when he was the editor of it.
Have you ever read a book called Stick It Up Your Punter?
I have, years ago. Yeah.
I've read it 3 times. I reread it last year.
Yeah.
It's still as fascinating and shocking.
Well, again,
remember it.
Well, it's the thing. I mean, that cavalier spirit that he's got. In some ways, it's attractive. But again, the other thing you have to remember about it is that there's real people's real lives being ruined by what the Sun did on too many occasions. I think.
I was rereading it. I'd forgotten just how openly homophobic people were in the 1980s.
Yeah, and led by.
You could use words like puffs and things in newspaper headlines. For example.
And the Sun did gleefully. So I mean, I don't know whether. Yes, it wasn't. I wouldn't call it a force for good.
Right. Listen, Alexei, thank you for coming on. You are the Soho Theatre on Tuesday, back on stage for the first time since '96. And where else can people see you after that?
I'm doing four Tuesdays at the Soho Theatre, and that'll probably and just to see, as I was saying, it is not a massive thing. It's just to see if it works. Doing that more. That more kind of modulated material. If it doesn't work, then that's the last you'll have seen of me, apart from book readings. But if it does work, then I'll try and expand it to something else.
It'll work, and you'll be hooked, I suspect.
Let's hope so.
Alexei Sayle, thank you so much.